Few names commanded more respect in the Western Territories during the turbulent years after the gold rush than Deadeye Davidson, the infamous Hawkins Gang, or the ruthless Blackthorn brothers. But perhaps none carried more weight than the whispered legend of Gabriel Ghost Hand Thorne, a man who'd put down his guns to seek peace, only to become one of the deadliest gunslingers the West had ever known. A man who once told a marshal, "I buried my guns with my past, but fate has a way of digging up what we try to leave behind." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Serpent Valley, Arizona Territory, spring of 1873. The settlement was like countless others scattered across the untamed frontier, a collection of weathered buildings and broken dreams clustered around a winding dirt road that disappeared into the distant mountains. But unlike the booming silver camps of Nevada or the cattle towns of Texas, Serpent Valley had remained unusually peaceful, hidden away in a forgotten corner of the territory where even the most ambitious railroad barons hadn't bothered to lay track. That's exactly why Gabriel Thorne chose it. He arrived on a crisp March morning, leading a dust-covered Appaloosa loaded with farming equipment. The few townsfolk who witnessed his arrival would later recall two distinct details: the way his right hand seemed to catch the morning light with an almost ethereal glow, and the curious silver-plated Colt peacemaker that rode low on his left. Hip, unusual for a right-handed man. Rebecca Chen, who ran the local boarding house with her elderly grandmother, watched him ride past her window that morning. There was something in the way he carried himself, she would later tell the town's chronicler, like a man who'd learned to walk quietly, not out of fear, but because he knew what loud footsteps could awaken. The town's aging land agent, Marcus Walsh, remembered how Thorne's weathered hands handled the property documents with unexpected grace. "Never seen a farmer with hands like that," Walsh would later muse. "Calloused, sure, but the kind of calluses that come from something harder than just holding a plow." Thorne paid for the old Mackenzie homestead in silver dollars, each coin meticulously counted, all minted before the war. The property lay 3 miles outside town, a forgotten patch of land where the valley's namesake serpents were said to gather when winter's chill drove them from the high country. Most folks considered it worthless, cursed even. Thorne just nodded when Walsh warned him about the snakes, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Sheriff Thomas Hayes, 23 years on the badge and veteran of both the war and the Indian campaigns, watched the newcomer from the shade of his office porch. 2 decades of keeping peace had taught him to read men like wanted posters, and something about Thorne's bearing spoke of more than just another drifter seeking a fresh start. That evening, Hayes made a careful entry in his journal. "There's 2 kinds of men who move that quiet. Those who've learned to hunt, and those who've learned to survive being hunted. This Thorne fellow, he moves like both." Within days, Thorne had settled into the old Mackenzie place, a sprawling piece of land that had lain abandoned since its previous owner disappeared during a particularly harsh winter. From sunrise to sunset, he worked methodically, clearing fields, mending fences, and repairing the old barn. Those who passed by noticed he kept that silver Colt close, even while digging irrigation ditches or breaking ground for a garden. Emma Sullivan, who ran the general store her late husband had built, was perhaps the first to notice something peculiar about their newest neighbor. Once a week, he'd come to town for supplies, his lists always precise, his manner unfailingly courteous. He had this way about him, she would later recall, like still water running deep, the kind of quiet that makes you think twice about what might be beneath the surface. The local saloon crowd tried to draw him out at first, as they did with all newcomers. Jack Threefinger. Murphy, a cattle drover who'd had more whiskey than sense, once decided to test the quiet farmer's patience. "What's the matter, friend?" he drawled, deliberately bumping Thorne's table. "Rattler's got your tongue, or you. Just naturally shy around real men?" The silence that followed seemed to draw all the air from the room. Thorne didn't stand, didn't reach for his gun, just looked up at Murphy with eyes that seemed to have seen too much to be bothered by so little. Something in that gaze made the drover step back, his bravado withering like spring grass in August heat. "Meant no offense," Murphy stammered, backing away. He left town the next morning, telling anyone who'd listened that he'd seen something in those eyes that no farmer had any right carrying around. What no one in Serpent Valley knew, not yet, was that their peaceful corner of the territory had drawn unwanted attention. The Savage brothers, led by the notorious Isaiah Savage and his 4 equally ruthless siblings, had been watching the valley from afar, seeing it as perfect territory for their particular brand of business. They had no way of knowing that the quiet farmer they would soon mock was the same man who'd once faced down the entire Hawkins gang single-handed, leaving 7 dead and twice that many wishing they were. Within a week of Thorne's arrival, subtle, changes began rippling through Serpent Valley like wind through summer wheat. The quiet farmer had a way of appearing exactly where he was needed, though few could say they'd actually seen him coming or going. It was as if he moved with the shadows themselves, present one moment and gone the next, leaving only whispered stories in his wake. Dr. Samuel Morrison, the town's aging physician, was the first to glimpse beneath Thorne's carefully maintained facade. The doctor had been called out to the Mackenzie place one evening to treat what Thorne described as a minor injury from farm work. What Morrison found instead was a knife wound along the farmer's forearm, fresh enough that the bandage still showed spots of red. "Peculiar sort of farming accident," Morrison noted dryly as he cleaned the wound. Thorne's only response was that ghost of a smile that never quite reached his eyes. But it was what the doctor saw next that truly gave him pause. The tapestry of old scars that covered Thorne's arms and torso told a story no simple farmer should have lived to tell. Bullet wounds, knife marks, and what appeared to be arrow. Scars spoke of a life filled with the kind of violence most men wouldn't survive once, let alone repeatedly. "I've treated my share of farmers and ranchers," Morrison would later confide to Sheriff Hayes. "But those weren't the marks of a man who tangles with stubborn livestock. Those were the marks of someone who's danced with death so many times they've learned all the steps by heart." Thorne's weekly trips into town became something of a ritual that folks could set their pocket watches by. Every Wednesday morning, precisely at 8, he would appear at Emma Sullivan's general store. His shopping list never varied. Ammunition for his Colt, coffee, basic supplies, and always a handful of peppermint sticks which he would quietly leave on Rebecca Chen's boarding house porch for the local children. Rebecca, whose second-story window offered a clear view of the street, began to notice patterns in his behavior that seemed out of place for a simple farmer. "He always positioned himself with his back to a wall," she wrote in her journal, "always kept the street in view. The kind of habits a man doesn't pick up behind a plow." The Mackenzie place itself underwent a transformation that seemed to defy the laws of time and physical limitation. Working alone, Thorne somehow managed to rebuild the barn, repair 5 miles of fence, and establish a small but thriving herd of cattle in less than a month. More curious still were the modifications that more observant visitors noticed: clear lines of sight from the house to all approaches, strategically placed mirrors that caught the sunlight in ways that illuminated blind spots, and an elaborate system of wind chimes strung along the property's perimeter that would sound at the slightest disturbance. "Man's either the most paranoid farmer I've ever seen," Deputy Frank Wilson remarked to Sheriff Hayes, "or he's expecting the kind of trouble that doesn't usually find its way to Serpent Valley." Hayes, who had taken to watching Thorne with the patience of a man who'd learned the hard way that still waters often ran deadly deep, merely nodded. 23 years of wearing a badge had taught him that men who went to such lengths to prepare for trouble usually had good reason to expect it. The first real hint of Thorne's true nature came during a late spring evening at the Copper Snake saloon. A group of miners, fresh from a lucky strike and deep in their cups, had taken to harassing young Wei Chen, Rebecca's teenage brother, who was delivering clean linens to the saloon. Thorne had been sitting quietly in his usual corner, nursing the same glass of whiskey he'd ordered an hour earlier, when one of the miners grabbed Wei by the collar. What happened next occurred so quickly that witnesses would later disagree on the exact sequence of events. One moment Thorn was seated in the shadows. The next he stood between Way and his tormentor. He hadn't drawn his silver colt, hadn't made any aggressive moves at all, but something in his stance, in the deadly stillness of his presence, made every man in the saloon reach instinctively for their guns. "The boy," Thorn said in that quiet voice that somehow carried to every corner of the room, "is under my protection." The miner, too drunk to recognize the death in Thorn's eyes, started to reach for his gun. Before his fingers could even brush leather, Thorn's glowing right hand moved in a blur. What followed was a lesson in the kind of speed that most men only heard about in legend. The miner's gun cleared leather, only to find itself dismantled, its pieces scattered across the floor, its owner staring in disbelief at hands that couldn't quite understand how they'd been outmaneuvered. "Time to find another saloon," Thorn suggested softly. The miners, suddenly sober, didn't need to be told twice. After they'd gone, old Jake Martinez, a grizzled prospector who'd seen his share of gunfights from San Francisco to Dodge City, stared at Thorn with newfound recognition. "Sweet mother of mercy," he whispered, his weathered hands trembling slightly on his glass. "I saw hands move like that once before, 8 years ago in Tombstone. But the man who moved like that, they called him—" Before he could finish his thought, Thorn had already melted back into the shadows, leaving only questions and whispered speculation in his wake. The incident fueled a fresh round of rumors about the quiet farmer's true identity. But like all previous attempts to unravel his mystery, these too found no purchase in fact. What no one in Serpent Valley yet realized was that this small demonstration was merely a ripple before the storm. The Savage brothers, watching through their network of informants, saw it differently. To them, Thorn's display of skill wasn't a warning, it was a challenge. And the Savages had never been known to leave a challenge unanswered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Isaiah Savage, upon hearing the report, merely smiled that cold smile that had preceded so many men's deaths. "Seems our quiet friend is more interesting than we thought," he mused, running a whetstone along his favorite skinning knife. "Perhaps it's time we paid Serpent Valley a proper visit." The wheels of fate had begun to turn, and Serpent Valley's peaceful existence hung in the balance, suspended between a quiet farmer's desire for peace and a violent past that refused to stay buried. The revelation of Gabriel Thorn's true identity came not with a gunshot's bang, but with a wandering lawman's whisper. U.S. Marshal Daniel Cross rode into Serpent Valley on a warm spring morning, his badge catching the early light. At first glance, he was just another lawman passing through, until he caught sight of Thorn leaving the general store. Cross's reaction was immediate and visceral. The veteran marshal, known throughout 4 territories for his unshakable nerve, nearly fell from his horse. His face went pale as fresh linen, and his hand instinctively moved toward his gun before freezing halfway. "Sweet mother of mercy," he breathed, drawing Sheriff Hayes's immediate attention. "The ghost hand, still alive." Hayes, who'd been sharing his morning coffee with the marshal on the jail's porch, nearly choked. "The ghost hand? You don't mean—" "Gabriel Ghost Hand Thorn," Cross confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking the name too loudly might summon its owner. "Fastest left hand in the New Mexico territory before the border wars. They said he could draw and fire 5 shots before a dropped playing card could hit the ground. Some claimed his right hand glowed like moonlight when trouble was coming, a mark left by an old Apache medicine man he'd once shown mercy to." The sheriff's office quickly became an impromptu conference room as Cross shared what he knew. 8. Years ago, Thorn had been a legend in the making, a lawman whose speed with a gun was matched only by his dedication to justice. His reputation grew with each outlaw he brought to justice, earning him the nickname Ghost Hand for his impossibly fast left-handed draw and his seemingly supernatural ability to sense danger. But it wasn't just that he was fast, Cross explained, pacing the small office. He was precise, surgical, could shoot a gun out of a man's hand at 20 paces or put a bullet through his heart, whichever the situation called for. Never saw anyone who could match him. Then came the border wars. Not a war in the traditional sense, but a bloody series of raids and counter-raids along the New Mexico Territory border that spiraled into open warfare. Thorne and his younger sister Sarah, a schoolteacher, had tried to keep the peace in their small border town. But one side, the notorious Hawkins gang, decided to send a message. They caught Sarah alone at her schoolhouse, Cross continued, his voice growing heavy. Burned it to the ground with her inside. Some say they wanted to draw her brother out. Others say they just wanted to prove no law could touch them. Whatever. The result was the same. Gabriel Thorne, the measured lawman who always gave men a chance to surrender, disappeared. In his place emerged something else, a force of nature that tore through the Hawkins gang like a prairie fire through dry grass. 7 dead, 14 wounded, Cross said, shaking his head. That's how many fell to his gun in 3 days. Every single person involved in his sister's death, from the triggermen to the ones who just stood watch. He found them all, no matter where they ran. Each one died with a ghost in their eyes. And after? Hayes asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Just vanished. Some said he died in a shootout in Colorado. Others claimed he'd hung up his guns and disappeared into Mexico. Nobody really knew. Cross moved to the window, watching Thorne's retreating figure. Until now. The news spread through Serpent Valley like wildfire, though few dared speak of it above a whisper. The quiet farmer who'd settled among them wasn't just any gunslinger. He was Ghost Hand Thorne, the man who'd become a legend and then a ghost. Marcus Walsh found himself reviewing the land purchase documents with new eyes. The silver dollars Thorne had used to buy the Mackenzie place had all been dated before the border wars, as if they'd been stored away, waiting for the day he'd need a fresh start. Dr. Morrison's medical observations took on new significance. The scar pattern, he explained to Hayes later that day. It tells a story. The older ones, they're from face-to-face fights, the kind a lawman gets in the line of duty. But the newer ones, they're different. Those are the marks of someone who's learned to fight from the shadows. Old Jake Martinez, finally completing his interrupted thought from weeks before, added another piece to the puzzle. Saw him in Tombstone. Those years back, the old prospector revealed over whiskey. Right after the border wars business. He walked into a saloon where 3 of Hawkins's men were hiding. Didn't say a word, didn't make a sound. Just ghost and thunder. When it was over, 2 were dead, 1 was wounded, and Thorne hadn't even mussed his coat. But it was Rebecca Chen who perhaps understood best what the revelation meant. He didn't come here to hide, she told her grandmother as they watched Thorne's weekly supply run. Men like him, they don't hide. They wait, like lightning gathering in storm clouds. She wasn't wrong. The very next day, riders from the south brought news that would prove her right. The Savage brothers had begun moving north, leaving a trail of burned ranches and terrified townspeople in their wake. 5 brothers, each deadlier than the last, leading a gang of 30 hardened killers. Isaiah Savage, the eldest, had a reputation for cruel efficiency. Mark, the second brother, was a sharpshooter who could pick a man off his horse at 400 yards. The twins, Luke and John, were said to be mirror images of evil, moving in perfect coordination during a fight. And Peter, the youngest, was a master tracker who could follow a ghost across bare rock. Thorne took the news with his characteristic silence, but those who watched closely noticed changes. His weekly trips to town now included extra ammunition. The wind chimes around his property were adjusted, sight lines cleared. He spent more time practicing with that silver Colt, though few could actually see him draw. Just the rapid fire, Reports of shots and the ring of bullets finding their marks. He knows they're coming, Sheriff Hayes told Marshal Cross, who'd decided to extend his stay in Serpent Valley. Question is, why isn't he leaving? With his history, he could disappear. Again, find another quiet town. Cross watched Thorne's methodical preparations with knowing eyes. Because this time he's found something worth fighting for, something worth staking his ground over. The Marshal's words would prove prophetic sooner than anyone expected. The Savage brothers announced their presence in Serpent Valley with characteristic brutality. They didn't ride straight into town. Men like the Savages preferred to let fear do their work first. The Henderson Ranch, 5 miles outside town, was hit in the night. No one was killed, but their barn was burned to the ground, cattle scattered, to the winds. The message was clear. Protection would come at a price. 2 days later, the Miller place suffered the same fate, though Old Man Miller managed to wing one of the raiders with his shotgun. The wounded man's blood trail led straight north toward Savage territory. Thorne rode out at dawn to inspect both properties, his glowing right hand trailing along fence posts and scattered debris. The way he moved, studying signs only he could see, reminded Hayes of an Apache scout he'd once known, a man who could read a story in bent grass and scattered pebbles. "They're testing us," Thorne said quietly when he returned, speaking to Hayes and Cross on the jail's porch. "Watching how we respond, looking for patterns." It was the most anyone had heard him say at once since his arrival. 5 raids in 2 weeks, Hayes noted, all following the same pattern. Hit at night, burn what they can, scatter the livestock. No killings yet, but that's coming, Thorne finished, his voice soft as distant thunder. The Savages are building to something. This is just the overture. The town council met in emergency session, gathering in the back room of Emma Sullivan's store. The debate raged for hours. Should they send for army troops? Organize a militia? Pay the protection money the Savages would inevitably demand? Rebecca Chen, representing her grandmother's interests, stood before the council. "We have something better than troops," she declared. "We have the ghost hand." Old Jake Martinez spat in disgust. "1 man against 30? Against the Savage brothers? Them's fool's odds, girl. 7 against 1 weren't fool's odds," Rebecca countered. "Ask the Hawkins gang how that turned out." "Oh wait, you can't. They're all dead." The debate might have continued, but a rider burst in, his horse lathered and breathing hard. Peter Savage, the youngest brother, had been spotted in town, calmly walking down Main Street as if he owned it. They found him in the Copper Snake Saloon, drinking expensive whiskey at the bar. He was younger than most expected, barely past 20, with boyish features that belied his deadly reputation. The silver-handled skinning knife at his belt had notches carved into it, one for each successful track. "Nice town you got here," Peter drawled, not bothering to turn around as Hayes and Cross entered. "Peaceful. Quiet. Be a shame if something happened to disturb that peace." "State your business or ride out," Hayes said, his hand near his gun. Peter smiled, finally turning to face them. "Just delivering a message from my brothers. Isaiah says this territory's growing, says it needs proper management, proper protection. We're offering our services for a reasonable fee." "And if we decline?" Cross asked, though they all knew the answer. "Then I suppose things might get a bit less peaceful." Peter's eyes scanned the saloon, settling on the corner where Thorne usually sat. "Though I hear you've got yourself some protection already. A quiet farmer with a fancy gun and a glowing hand. Strange thing about that farmer. His tracks don't read right. Almost like he's 2 different men." The young Savage stood, dropping coins on the bar. "My brothers say he claims to be Ghost Hand Thorne. But that's funny because I heard Ghost Hand Thorne died in Colorado years back. Shot through the heart by a bounty hunter." He patted his skinning knife. "Course, only one way to be sure. Might have to dig up some answers." He moved toward the door, pausing beside Hayes. 3 days. That's how long Isaiah says you have to consider our offer. After that?" He shrugged. "Well, peace. is a fragile thing in these territories. After Peter rode out, the town seemed to hold its collective breath. Everyone knew the Savage brothers' reputation, how they'd taken over 3 territories through a combination of brutality and cunning. They weren't just bandits. They were empire builders who used fear like a carpenter uses nails. At his ranch, Thorn continued his preparations, though they took on a different character now. The wind chimes were reset, their tones altered. New mirrors appeared in seemingly random locations. He spent hours practicing with that silver colt, but now many noticed something odd. He was practicing with his right hand, the glowing one, though everyone knew Ghost Hand Thorn's legendary speed came from his left. "Man's got something planned," Marshal Cross observed, watching through his spyglass. "Same way he did during the border wars. He's not just preparing for a fight, he's preparing a killing ground." Rebecca, bringing news from town, found Thorn on his porch that evening. He was cleaning the silver colt, his movements precise and unhurried. The sunset painted his glowing right hand in shades of fire. "They'll come in force," she said. "All 5 brothers, their whole gang, 30 men at least." Thorn nodded, as if she'd merely commented on the weather. "More likely 40. The Savages. Always keep a few men in reserve." "That's suicide odds," she protested. "Even for Ghost Hand Thorn." He looked up then, and for the first time she saw something like amusement in his eyes. "The thing about ghosts, Miss Chen," he said softly, "is that they don't much care about odds." The second Savage brother, Mark, announced his arrival in Serpent Valley with a single shot. The bullet struck the weather vane atop the general store, nearly 400 yards from where witnesses spotted him on a distant ridge. The message was clear. Nowhere in the valley was beyond their reach. That same afternoon, the twins, Luke and John, rode boldly down Main Street, mirror images in black dusters, their matching silver spurs singing a duet of menace. They didn't speak, didn't make any overt threats. They simply rode slowly past every business, every home, making sure folks got a good look at the matching gun belts that held 3 revolvers each. "Psychological warfare," Marshal Cross explained to Hayes as they watched from the jail. "Isaiah, Savage's trademark. He likes to break a town's spirit before he breaks its back." But Serpent Valley wasn't breaking. Something had changed since Thorn's identity had been revealed. Where once there had been fear of the Savages, now there was something else. A quiet defiance born from having a legend in their midst. Emma Sullivan refused to close her store early when the twins rode past, standing defiantly in her doorway. Old Jake Martinez openly checked his shotgun on the saloon's porch as they passed. Even young Wei Chen, no longer the frightened boy from the saloon incident, stood his ground when the twins' horses blocked his path. "They're not just standing up for themselves," Cross observed. "They're standing up for him. Man spends 8 years trying to bury his legend, and instead, he's given these folks something to believe in." The tension reached new heights when Dr. Morrison was called out to Thorn's ranch that evening. He returned hours later, his face ashen. "Found him in the barn," the doctor told Hayes and Cross over a much-needed whiskey. "He was practicing." "Practicing what?" Hayes asked. "Everything." Morrison drained his glass. "He had targets set up, bottles, playing cards, coins, but the way he was shooting—" The doctor shook his head. "First with his left hand, faster than anything I've ever seen. Then with his right, that glowing one, slower but different, like he was painting with bullets, each shot placed with surgical precision." "2 different styles," Cross mused. "Almost like 2 different men," Morrison finished. "But that's not what worried me. It was the other preparations." He described what he'd seen. Carefully positioned mirrors that created impossible angles for ricochets, wind chimes tuned to specific frequencies that could mask or amplify sounds, and strangest of all, patterns of silver dollars scattered seemingly at random across the property. "Asked him about those," Morrison said. "All he'd say was, sometimes a coin flip makes all the difference." Late that night, Rebecca Chen heard singing from the direction of Thorn's ranch. an old Apache spirit song that her grandmother recognized. "It's a warrior's preparation," the old woman explained. "A way of making peace with whatever comes next." The next morning brought Isaiah Savage himself, riding into town alone as the sun crested the mountains. He was older than his brothers, with gray streaks in his black hair and scars that spoke of countless battles. Unlike his siblings, who dressed for intimidation, Isaiah wore simple range clothes. His only concession to ostentation was a gun belt made from intricately tooled leather, each panel depicting scenes from his most famous victories. He tied his horse outside the jail and walked in as if he owned the place, nodding cordially to Hayes and Cross. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice cultured and calm, "I believe we have matters to discuss." "Your brother already delivered your message," Hayes replied. "Answer's still no." Isaiah smiled, but it never reached his eyes. But that was just a preliminary offer. I'm here to sweeten the pot." He laid a heavy canvas bag on Hayes's desk. Gold coins spilled out, enough to buy half the businesses in town. "Consider it an investment in Serpent Valley's future. My brothers and I, we're not just bandits, we're businessmen. We see potential here." "Potential for what?" Cross demanded. "Growth. Progress. The railroads pushing west. New territories. Opening up. A man with vision could turn this sleepy little valley into something remarkable." Isaiah's smile widened. "All it takes is the right management." "And if we decline?" Hayes asked, though they all knew the answer. "Then I suppose we'll have to demonstrate why proper management is necessary, starting with this legend you're harboring." Isaiah's voice hardened. "Ghost Hand Thorne, a remarkable story. But you see, I knew the real Ghost Hand. Watched him die in Colorado 6 years ago. Shot through the heart by one of my own men." He stood, adjusting his gun belt. "Your farmer friend, he's good. Maybe even good enough to fool folks who've only heard the stories. But there's one small detail he got wrong. A detail only someone who was there would know." "And what's that?" Cross asked, unable to hide his curiosity. Isaiah headed for the door. "The real Ghost Hand's sister wasn't killed in a schoolhouse fire. She survived, married one of my men. Lives in Colorado now, happy as can be. Your man's playing a role, using a dead man's reputation, and tomorrow at noon, I'm going to prove it." He paused in the doorway. "One last chance, gentlemen. Take the gold. Tell your fake ghost to ride out, or watch this valley burn." After he left, Hayes turned to Cross. "What do you make of that story about Thorne's sister?" Cross frowned. "Could be true. Could be another head game. With Isaiah Savage, it's hard to tell where the lies end and the truth begins. But when they rode out to warn Thorne, they found him already mounted up, that silver colt riding easy on his hip. His right hand glowed brighter than usual, casting strange shadows in the early morning light. "Heard about Isaiah's visit," he said quietly. "Figured it was time." "Time for what?" Hayes asked. "Time to remind folks why they called me Ghost Hand, and why the stories about my death were greatly exaggerated." He touched his glowing right hand to the silver colt. "Tomorrow at noon, we're going to have a resurrection." The night before, the confrontation settled over Serpent Valley like a burial shroud. Storm clouds gathered in the distance, sheet lightning illuminating the mountains in brief ghostly flashes. If you've been following this tale of revenge and redemption, make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next will leave you breathless. Word of the impending showdown spread through town like wildfire. Isaiah Savage's men took up positions on the outskirts, not moving in, just watching, waiting. The twins, Luke and John, rode continuous patrols along Main Street, their matching black dusters catching the wind. Mark, the sharpshooter, was spotted setting up on 3 different rooftops throughout the evening, testing sight lines and measuring distances. Peter, the tracker, circled Thorne's property like a wolf testing a fence line. Dr. Morrison found himself treating an unusual patient that night, Rebecca Chen's grandmother. The old woman had worked herself into a state of agitation, muttering in Chinese and clutching a worn leather pouch. "She keeps talking about spirits," Rebecca translated, worry clear in her voice. "Says she's seen this before, back in China. A warrior marked by spirits, carrying 2 destinies." She hesitated. "Says Thorne's glowing hand isn't a blessing. It's a price being paid." The doctor might have dismissed it as an old woman's ramblings, but he'd seen too much lately to discount anything. "What kind of price?" The old woman spoke rapidly in Chinese, her eyes fever bright. Rebecca translated slowly, choosing her words carefully. She says the spirits don't give power without taking something in return. The stronger the power, the heavier the price. Meanwhile, at his ranch, Thorne made his final preparations with methodical precision. Marshal Cross, watching through his spyglass, noted something odd about the pattern of silver dollars scattered across the property. "They're not random," he told Hayes. "Look, they form perfect circles, each one exactly 20 paces from the next, and those mirrors he set up. They're positioned to catch the noon sun tomorrow, but at different heights, different angles." Hayes studied the setup through his own glass. "Almost like he's creating a dance floor," Cross finished. "Same thing he did during the border wars. Turns the whole battlefield into a weapon." But it was old Jake Martinez who provided the most disturbing insight. The aged prospector rode out to Thorne's ranch just after sunset, carrying a bottle of ancient whiskey he'd been saving for his own funeral. He found Thorne on the porch, methodically cleaning the silver Colt. The gun had been completely disassembled, each piece laid out with surgical precision. What caught Jake's eye, though, was how Thorne cleaned it, first with his left hand, then with his glowing right, as if each hand needed to know the weapon intimately. "Saw something like this once," Jake said, setting down the whiskey. "Up in Navajo country. Medicine man said some warriors could split their spirit, become 2 men in one body. Called it ghost walking. He poured 2 glasses. Course, he also said it would eventually tear a man apart. Thorne's only response was to reach for a glass with his left hand. The right, glowing brighter now, remained at work on the gun. "Isaiah's story about your sister," Jake ventured. "That true?" "Truth's a funny thing in the territories," Thorne replied, his voice soft as ever. "Sometimes what really happened matters less than what people believe happened." He looked up, and for the first time, Jake saw something like pain in those quiet eyes. "My sister died in that schoolhouse. I buried her myself. But sometimes the dead don't stay buried. And sometimes the living pretend to be dead," Jake pressed. Isaiah seemed mighty certain about that Colorado business. Thorne's right hand paused in its work, the glow pulsing slightly. "Tomorrow at noon, everybody's going to be certain about something." He raised his glass. "Question is, will they be certain about the right thing?" Back in town, Emma Sullivan made a discovery while closing up her store. In the record book where Thorne logged his weekly purchases, she noticed something strange. Every entry was made twice, once in a flowing left-handed script, and once in a sharper right-handed hand. More telling still, they recorded slightly. Different items. She brought the book to Hayes and Cross. "Look here," she pointed. "Left hand buys ammunition, coffee, basic supplies. Right hand buys mirror glass, silver polish, and something called ghost sage from the Indian trading post." "2 hands, 2 minds," Cross mused. "Like he's preparing for 2 different fights." As midnight approached, Rebecca Chen climbed to the boarding house roof, unable to sleep. The storm clouds had moved closer, and in their flickering light, she saw something that made her breath catch. Thorne was walking his property, but he seemed to be having an argument with himself. His left hand would gesture one way, his right another. Sometimes he'd stop, turn as if disagreeing with an invisible companion. The glowing right hand would flare and dim like a lantern in wind. Most unsettling of all, she could have sworn she saw him cast 2 shadows. She wrote in her journal that, "Night. Grandmother says when a warrior walks with spirits, he risks becoming a spirit himself. Tonight, watching Mr. Thorne, I wonder if that hasn't already happened. Is he one man playing two parts, or two men sharing one body? Tomorrow at noon, I suppose we'll all find out." The storm finally broke around 3 in the morning. Rain pounded. The valley like hammer blows, but through it came another sound. Thorne practicing. Not the rapid fire of his legendary left-handed draw, but single, precise shots from his right. Each one followed by the ring of a silver dollar being struck. "Dead center, making down payments," Hayes muttered, listening from his office. "On what?" Cross asked. "On whatever price those spirits are charging him." Dawn broke over Serpent Valley like a fever dream, the aftermath of the storm painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. If you're invested in this tale of redemption and revenge, make sure to subscribe because the moment of truth is approaching. Isaiah Savage's preparations began before first light. His men moved through the town with military precision, taking up positions that had clearly been scouted days in advance. The twins, Luke and John, stationed themselves at opposite ends of Main Street, their matching gun belts gleaming with fresh oil. Mark, the sharpshooter, disappeared into the upper floor of the hotel, rifle cases strapped to his back. Peter, the youngest, moved from shadow to shadow, checking tracks and sightlines with predatory focus. 43 men, Marshal Cross counted from the jail's roof. More than we thought. Isaiah's been holding back, keeping some in reserve. Sheriff Hayes studied the deployment through his spyglass. They're not just surrounding the town. They're creating channels, forcing paths of movement. Like hunters, setting up a kill zone. "Question is," Cross muttered, "who's hunting whom?" At the Mackenzie Ranch, Thorne's morning routine appeared eerily normal. Those watching saw him tend his cattle, check his fences, and clean his weapons with the same methodical precision he showed every day. The only differences were subtle. The way his glowing right hand seemed to pulse with each passing hour, the fact that he wore his gun belt while doing chores, and most tellingly, the way he would occasionally stop and hold conversations with himself, left hand gesturing one way, right another. Dr. Morrison, making his morning rounds, found himself treating an unusual number of patients complaining of headaches and unexplained anxiety. "It's like the air before a tornado," he told Hayes. "Everyone can feel something coming, even if they can't see it yet." Rebecca Chen's grandmother grew more agitated as noon approached. She burned strange herbs in brass bowls, chanting in Chinese, while consulting ancient oracle bones. "She says the spirits are gathering," Rebecca translated. "Says they're waiting to see which path the ghost warrior chooses." "Which path?" Hayes asked. "Grandmother says a man marked by spirits always faces 2 paths, the one that leads to power and the one that leads to peace. But she says," Rebecca hesitated, "she says sometimes a man can walk both paths at once if he's willing to pay the price." Around 10 o'clock, Isaiah Savage made his move. He rode into town alone, as he had the day before, but this time he carried a wooden box across his saddle. He set it up in the middle of Main Street, a simple pine coffin, just the right size for a man. "Thought I'd save the undertaker some trouble," he called out, his cultured voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. "Don't worry about measurements. I got them from the real Ghost Hand's grave in Colorado." His men laughed, the sound echoing off the buildings like coyotes in a canyon. But their laughter died quickly when Thorne appeared at the end of the street, walking his paint horse with unhurried steps. He'd traded his farmer's clothes for a black duster that seemed to absorb the morning light. The silver colt rode easy on his hip, and his right hand glowed bright enough to cast shadows even in daylight. "Been a while, Isaiah," Thorne said quietly, his voice somehow carrying despite its softness. "Still playing the same old games?" Something flickered across Isaiah's face. Recognition, perhaps, or fear quickly masked. "Well now, that's interesting. You sound just like him. Even got that quiet way of talking down perfect. But you see, I know you're not him, because I watched him die. put 3 bullets in him myself. Did you? Thorne's ghost of a smile appeared. Might want to check your count again. Isaiah's hand dropped to his gun, but he didn't draw. Not yet. All right then, let's settle this. You say you're Ghost Hand Thorne. Prove it. Tell everyone here what really happened to Sarah Thorne. Tell them about the schoolhouse fire. You mean the fire you started? Thorne's left hand moved slightly, closer to his gun. Or the one you told your men to start while you watched from the hills? Wrong answer. Isaiah's smile turned predatory. Sarah Thorne lives in Colorado with my former lieutenant. Married.
Him 6 years ago. Want to know how I know? Because I gave her away at the wedding.
The silence that followed was heavy enough to bend light. Thorne stood motionless, his glowing right hand pulsing like a heartbeat. When he finally spoke, his voice carried 2 tones, one from his left side, one from his right, as if 2 men were speaking in perfect unison. Interesting story, he said, but you forgot something important. And what's that, Ghost Hand? Thorne wasn't the only one at that schoolhouse. There was another man there too, a bounty hunter who'd been tracking the Hawkins gang. Man with a right hand that glowed like moonlight, blessed or cursed by an Apache medicine man he'd spared years before. Isaiah's smile faltered. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe you did kill Ghost Hand Thorne in Colorado, and maybe his sister did survive. But you forgot about the other man, the one who held Sarah while she died, the one who swore an oath to 2 spirits that day, the man who learned to walk both paths. Thorne's right hand flared like a star, while his left drifted closer to the silver colt. You see, Isaiah, sometimes a legend doesn't die. Sometimes it just finds a new story to tell. The clock on the church tower began to strike 11. 1 hour until noon. 1 hour until Serpent Valley would learn whether it harbored one legend, or 2, and what price the spirits demanded for their gifts. Isaiah mounted up, his composure slightly shaken. 1 hour, he called out. 1 hour to decide. Are you a ghost playing at being a man, or a man playing at being a ghost? Thorne's response was characteristically quiet, but it carried the weight of 2 voices, 2 destinies about to collide. Why don't we let the spirits decide? The hour before noon stretched like dried leather in the sun. If you're captivated by this tale of spirits and 6 guns, make sure you're subscribed because the moment of reckoning is at hand. Rebecca Chen's grandmother fell into a trance, swaying on her porch as she clutched her oracle bones. The spirits are choosing sides, she muttered in Chinese, her eyes rolling back. 2 paths converging, 2 souls trading places. The price must be paid, but who will pay it? The old woman's words proved prophetic. As the morning wore on, strange phenomena began manifesting throughout Serpent Valley. The scattered silver dollars on Thorne's property started ringing like tiny bells, though no wind stirred them. The carefully positioned mirrors caught impossible reflections, showing scenes from different times: a burning schoolhouse, a shootout. In Colorado, a medicine man raising his hands in blessing or curse. Dr. Morrison, watching through his office window, saw something that defied explanation. Thorne's casting 2 shadows, he reported to Hayes and Cross. One moving left, one moving right, like he's being pulled in 2 directions at once. The Savage brothers noticed it too. The twins, Luke and John, shifted nervously at their posts, their mirror image coordination suddenly disrupted. Mark, the sharpshooter, complained that his scope kept showing 2 targets where only 1 man stood. Peter, the tracker, found himself following 2 sets of tracks that somehow came from the same boots. Something ain't natural about this, Luke muttered to his twin. Isaiah's story about Colorado, about the sister. What if we're not dealing with 1 man pretending to be Ghost? Handthorn? John finished his brother's thought. What if we're dealing with 2 men who've somehow become 1? Their unease spread through the Savage gang like poison in a water barrel. These were hardened killers who'd faced down posses and armies, but they'd never encountered anything like this. The way Thorn moved between sun and shadow, the way his right hand glowed brighter with each passing minute, the way he seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once, it all spoke of something beyond their experience. Isaiah Savage, watching. From the hotel balcony, maintained his composed facade, but those who looked closely could see doubt creeping into his eyes. He'd built his reputation on knowing his opponents, on turning their legends against them. But how do you fight a man who might be two legends in one body? Marshall Cross, who'd seen his share of strange things on the frontier, offered his theory to Hayes. Remember what the old woman said about walking two paths? What if that's literally what happened? Ghost Hand Thorn and that bounty hunter he mentioned, what if they both died at that schoolhouse, and some power or spirit offered them a chance for justice? At what price? Hayes wondered. Look at his hands, Cross pointed out. Left hand fastest gun in the territories, right hand glowing with spirit power. Two men sharing one body, one seeking justice, one seeking redemption. But spirits don't give gifts without taking something in return. Old Jake Martinez added another piece to the puzzle. Years ago, he'd heard stories about an Apache ritual where a warrior could bind his spirit to another's, sharing one body to complete a sacred task. But it was forbidden, he explained, passing his whiskey flask. The spirits demanded balance. For two souls to share one flesh, something of equal value had to be surrendered. As 11:30 approached, Thorn began his final preparations. He walked the property one last time, his movements flowing like water, sometimes quick and deadly like Ghost Hand's legendary speed, sometimes precise and measured like a spirit-touched bounty hunter's patience. The silver dollars scattered. Across his land began to spin on their edges, catching the light like tiny mirrors. The wind chimes he'd positioned sang complex harmonies that no natural breeze could produce. And most telling of all, the mirrors he'd arranged started reflecting not just light, but time itself, showing glimpses of what was, what is, and what might be. Emma Sullivan, watching from her store window, saw something that made her heart stop. For just a moment, one of the mirrors showed two men standing back to back, one in a lawman's badge and gun belt, the other in a bounty hunter's duster with a glowing right hand. Then they stepped toward each other and became one figure, Gabriel Thorn, as they knew him now. Isaiah made his final move at 12:45. He walked out into the street alone, his gun belt creaking with newness. "Last chance," he called out, his cultured voice carrying an edge of uncertainty. "Whoever or whatever you are, ride out now. There's no shame in admitting a deception." Thorn's response came from everywhere and nowhere, his quiet voice somehow filling the street like smoke. "You afraid, Isaiah? Afraid you might have to face both men you thought you killed? You're playing a dangerous game," Isaiah warned. "Ghost Hand Thorn died in Colorado. I put 3 bullets in him myself. His sister lives there now, happy and whole." "Half right," Thorn's voice came again, left hand resting near his gun while his right glowed like dawn. "But you forgot to count the bounty hunter, the one who held Sarah while she died, the one who made a bargain with spirits older than these mountains. 2 men, 2 deaths, 2 oaths sworn in blood and fire." The clock began striking the 3/4 hour. 15 minutes until noon. 15 minutes until Serpent Valley would witness either the greatest deception ever played or something far stranger, a legend split in two, sharing one body to balance the scales of justice. Isaiah's composure finally cracked. "What are you?" Thorn stepped into the street, the silver Colt gleaming on his hip. His left hand moved with Ghost Hand's legendary grace, while his right glowed bright enough to cast shadows at midday. When he spoke, his voice carried 2 tones, 2 souls, preparing to settle old debts. "I'm the price of your sins, Isaiah, the ghost you created and the spirit you awakened, and in 15 minutes, we're going to have a reckoning." The final minutes before noon fell over Serpent Valley like a burial shroud. If this tale of vengeance and spirits has captured your attention, make sure you're subscribed because what comes next will haunt your dreams. The temperature dropped suddenly. unnaturally, despite the high sun. The spinning silver dollars on Thorne's property rang louder, their chimes forming a ghostly chorus that echoed through the valley. The mirrors he'd positioned caught impossible angles of light, creating a web of illumination that seemed to trap time itself. Mark Savage, trying to draw a bead on Thorne through his rifle scope, found himself facing a peculiar problem. "I can't get a clean shot," he called down to Isaiah. "Every time I line him up, it's like I'm seeing two men in the same space." The twins, Luke and John, had positioned themselves on opposite sides of the street, ready to execute their famous crossfire maneuver. But something was wrong. Their mirror image coordination, practiced since childhood, suddenly felt off. Every time they tried to move in sync, they found themselves a half step apart, as if some force was deliberately disrupting their rhythm. Peter, the youngest Savage, had gone pale as he studied the ground around Thorne. "The tracks," he muttered, his legendary tracking skills betraying him for the first time. "They're impossible. Left foot belongs to a lawman's boots, right foot to a bounty hunter's. But they're being made by the same man at the same time." Isaiah. Savage maintained his composed facade, but those who looked closely could see beads of sweat on his forehead, despite the unnatural chill. He'd built his reputation on understanding his opponents, on turning their own legends against them. But how do you fight a man who might be two legends in one body? "Tell me something," Isaiah called out, playing for time as the clock inched toward noon. "That story about the bounty hunter, the one with the glowing hand, was that true? Or just another layer of deception?" Thorne's response came in that quiet voice that somehow carried to every corner of the valley. "Ask yourself this, Isaiah. When you shot Ghost Hand Thorne in Colorado, did you check his right hand? Did you look for a spirit's mark?" The question seemed to strike Isaiah like a physical blow. His careful composure cracked further as old memories surfaced. There was something. His right hand was covered in strange scars, glowing faintly. But he was dead. I made sure of it. "Half right again," Thorne said softly. "The lawman died that day. But the bounty hunter, the one marked by spirits, he lived just long enough to make a bargain. A bargain sealed in blood and blessed by powers older than these mountains." Rebecca Chen's grandmother suddenly stood up on her porch, her eyes rolling back as she spoke in a voice not her own. "The price must be paid," she called out in perfect English. "Two souls cannot share one flesh without surrender. The balance must be maintained." The clock struck 11:50, 10 minutes until noon. The silver dollars spun faster, their ringing reaching a fever pitch. The mirrors flashed with increasing intensity, showing fragments of the past. A schoolhouse in flames, a shootout in Colorado, an Apache medicine man raising his hands in blessing or curse. Isaiah's men began to shift, uneasily. They'd signed on to fight men, not spirits. The way Thorne moved between sun and shadow, the way his right hand glowed brighter with each passing minute, the way he seemed to exist in two places at once. It all spoke of something beyond their experience. "Enough games," Isaiah snapped, his cultured voice showing strain. "If you're really Ghost Hand Thorne, then explain Sarah. Explain how she's alive and well in Colorado, married to my former lieutenant." Thorne's response was curious. He laughed. Not the quiet chuckle they'd occasionally heard from him, but two distinct laughs overlapping, one sharp and bitter, one soft and sad. "You still don't understand, do you? Sarah did die in that schoolhouse. The bounty hunter held her as she passed. But the woman in Colorado, the one you gave away at that wedding, she's not Sarah Thorne." "You're lying," Isaiah snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I? Check your memories, Isaiah. Really, look at them. The woman in Colorado. Does she have Sarah's burn scars? Does she remember teaching at that schoolhouse? Or did your lieutenant just happen to find a woman who looked enough like Sarah to salve your guilty conscience?" The clock struck 11:55. 5 minutes until noon. The supernatural phenomena intensified. The spinning silver dollars lifted slightly off the ground, suspended by some invisible force. The mirror's reflections began to overlap, showing not just the past, but possible futures. Paths that diverged and converged like streams flowing into a single river. Marshal Cross, watching from the jail's porch, noticed something extraordinary. "Look at his shadow," he whispered to Hayes. "It's splitting." Indeed, Thorne's shadow had divided into two distinct shapes, one falling to the left, moving with a lawman's measured grace, the other to the right, flowing with a spirit-touched, hunter's otherworldly precision. As noon approached, the shadows began to merge and separate in a hypnotic dance, like two spirits sharing one form. "Last chance, Isaiah," Thorne called out, his voice still carrying those two distinct tones. "Surrender now. Admit your sins, face earthly justice, or wait 5 more minutes and face a different kind of judgment." Isaiah Savage, the man who'd built an empire on fear and deception, found himself facing something he couldn't manipulate or control. His carefully constructed story about Sarah, his claims about Colorado, they were unraveling in the face of something that defied explanation. The clock began to strike noon. The moment of truth had arrived. In the next few minutes, Serpent Valley would witness either the greatest deception ever played or something far stranger, a reckoning demanded by both man's law and spirit's justice, delivered by two souls, sharing one body, moving with one purpose. The final stroke of noon rang out across Serpent Valley like a death knell. If this tale of justice and supernatural vengeance has gripped you, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will change everything. The moment the clock struck 12, the impossible became reality. The spinning silver dollars burst into bright flame while remaining perfectly intact, creating a circle of silver fire around the street. The mirrors Thorne had positioned caught more than just light now. They trapped shadows, bending them into shapes that defied natural law. Isaiah Savage made his move first, perhaps hoping to end things before they spiraled further beyond his control. His draw was impressive, born from years of practice and countless gunfights. But Thorne moved like something from another world. His left hand swept the silver Colt from its holster with Ghost Hand's legendary speed, while his right hand glowed bright enough to turn noon into midnight. He fired twice, not with the gun, but with his glowing hand itself, sending pulses of spirit light that shattered Isaiah's carefully laid plans. The first burst caught the twins' crossfire pattern, disrupting their perfect symmetry and causing their shots to go wide. The second illuminated Mark's sniper position, temporarily blinding him and forcing him to abandon his careful aim. "Impossible," Isaiah breathed, his own gun still clearing leather. "No man can move like that." "That's your problem, Isaiah," Thorne replied in that dual-toned voice. "You're still thinking this is about one man." What followed was a display of gunfighting that defied explanation. Thorne moved with two distinct styles simultaneously, his left side flowing with Ghost Hand's uncanny speed, his right side moving with the precise, calculated grace of a spirit-touched hunter. The silver Colt spoke 6 times in rapid succession, each shot placed with surgical precision. But it wasn't just bullets he was firing. Each report was accompanied by a pulse of spirit light from his glowing hand, as if 2 different kinds of justice were being delivered at once. Mark Savage, trying for another shot from his new position, found his rifle barrel split perfectly down the middle, not by a bullet, but by a beam of concentrated spirit light. The twins, attempting their famous mirrored attack pattern, found themselves disarmed by shots that seemed to curve through impossible angles, guided by the light reflecting off Thorne's spinning silver dollars. Peter, the youngest Savage, tried to circle behind, using his tracking skills to predict Thorne's movements. But how do you track a man casting 2 shadows, leaving 2 sets of prints, existing in 2 spaces at once? "You see, Isaiah?" Thorn called out as he reloaded the Colt with his left hand while his right continued to pulse with spirit fire. There's two kinds of justice in this world. Man's justice, which deals in lead and law, and spirit's justice, which deals in debts and balance. You've earned both. Isaiah, his composure finally shattered, fired wildly. You're dead. I killed you in Colorado. I watched you fall. You killed Ghost Hand Thorn, came the reply, again in those overlapping voices. And you let a bounty hunter die trying to save Sarah. But spirits have their own laws, their own prices. Two souls wronged, two paths of vengeance, one body to carry both. The supernatural phenomena reached their peak. The circle of burning silver dollars cast strange shadows that moved against the light. The mirrors reflected scenes from multiple times at once. The schoolhouse fire, the Colorado shootout, the Apache medicine man ceremony, all overlapping like pages in a book viewed through water. Rebecca Chen's grandmother, still in her trance, called out in that voice that wasn't her own. The price comes due! 2 souls to balance, 2 debts to pay. Isaiah's remaining men began to break. The sight of their leader, the great Isaiah Savage, being systematically dismantled by something that straddled the line between man and spirit, proved too much for their courage. They fled, leaving their mounts behind, running from something. Their guns couldn't fight, but the Savage brothers stood their ground, bound by blood and pride. Mark attempted another shot. Luke and John tried their crossfire pattern once more, and Peter circled like a wolf looking for weakness. Isaiah, seeing his carefully built empire crumbling, decided to go for broke. Sarah's alive, he screamed, firing again. I can prove it. The woman in Colorado is a lie you told yourself, Thorn interrupted, his left hand spinning the Colt, while his right painted patterns of spirit light in the air. A deception to hide your guilt. But guilt has a way of finding truth, Isaiah, just like spirits have a way of finding justice. What happened next occurred so quickly that witnesses would later disagree on the sequence of events. Thorn's left hand fired the silver Colt 5 times with Ghost Hand's supernatural speed, while his right hand released one final burst of spirit light. The bullets found their marks with impossible precision, guns knocked from hands, shots that split gun belts and removed any chance of retaliation. The spirit light did something stranger still. It illuminated the truth. For just a moment, everyone in Serpent Valley saw what really happened in that burning schoolhouse, in that Colorado shootout. They saw Sarah's real fate, saw the bounty hunter's desperate attempt to save her, saw Ghost Hand's arrival moments too late, saw 2 men, 2 deaths, 2 oaths sworn before powers older than the territory itself. 2 souls, Thorn said quietly, as the Savage brothers stood disarmed and disgraced. 2 debts, 1 reckoning. Isaiah Savage, his carefully constructed world, lying in ruins around him, finally saw the truth. What? What are you? Thorn's response came in those 2 distinct voices, overlapping like thunder. We are what your sins created, the law you thought you killed, and the spirit you thought you could deceive. And now, it's time to balance the scales. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The spinning silver dollars cast their firelight higher, creating a dome of ethereal illumination over the confrontation. Within this supernatural arena, Thorn's dual nature became even more apparent. His movements flowed like quicksilver, each action serving 2 purposes. Ghost Hand's speed delivering justice through lead, while the bounty hunter's spirit-touched precision wielded light like a weapon. Watch closely, Isaiah, Thorn's overlapping voices commanded. Watch what your lies have bought you. With a motion too fast to follow, his left hand fanned the Colt's hammer, while his right hand traced patterns in the air. The gun's report and the spirit light's pulse synchronized perfectly, creating a harmony of supernatural proportions. Each of the Savage brothers found themselves caught in a web of light and lead, their carefully practiced tactics unraveling, in the face of something beyond their experience. Dr. Morrison, watching from his office window, would later write in his journal, "It wasn't just a gunfight. It was something older, something that belonged to the time when spirits and men walked the same paths. Two kinds of justice, delivered by two souls, sharing one flesh, moving with one purpose." The final confrontation had become more than just a showdown. It had become a reckoning, a balancing of cosmic scales that had been tipped by violence and deception. And as the light from Thorn's right hand reached its peak, as the silver dollars spun faster and the mirrors caught fragments of past and present, everyone in Serpent Valley understood they were witnessing something that would never be seen again. Two legends, two deaths, two paths of vengeance, one body to carry both. The price was about to be paid in full. In the supernatural arena created by spinning silver dollars and impossible mirror reflections, time itself seemed to pause. If this tale of dual vengeance has kept you spellbound, stay subscribed, because the price of justice is about to be revealed. The Savage brothers stood disarmed but not defeated, their legendary coordination shattered by something beyond their understanding. Isaiah Savage, his carefully constructed empire of lies crumbling around him, faced a truth he could no longer deny. "You want to know what really happened in Colorado?" Thorn's overlapping voices asked, the silver colt in his left hand while spirit light danced around his right. "Want to know why your perfect story about Sarah has more holes than a corn sieve?" The mirrors surrounding them shifted, their surfaces rippling like disturbed water. Suddenly, everyone in Serpent Valley could see it. The truth trapped in reflected light and shadow. They saw Colorado years ago. Ghost Hand Thorn tracking the Hawkins gang, closing in for justice. They saw Isaiah Savage making his deal with the gang's survivors, offering them protection in exchange for one last act of vengeance. They saw the ambush, saw Ghost Hand fall under 3 carefully placed shots. But then they saw something else. The bounty hunter with the glowing hand, arriving moments too late, drawn by the same trail. They watched as he fought his way through Isaiah's men, reaching the fallen lawman just before death claimed him. "2 men," Thorn narrated, his dual voices painting the scene. "2 paths, one seeking justice, one seeking redemption. Both failed by the lies you built, Isaiah." The spinning silver dollars chimed louder, their ring forming a ghostly harmony. With Thorn's words, Rebecca Chen's grandmother, still in her trance, began swaying to the rhythm. The spirits offered a choice, she called out in that voice that wasn't her own. 2 souls could share one flesh, but the price would be heavy. The balance must be maintained. The mirrors shifted again, showing the Apache medicine man standing over 2 dying men, the lawman and the bounty hunter. His hands moved in ancient patterns as he spoke words older than the territory itself. "The price," Thorn continued, his left hand steady on the colt while his right pulsed with increasing intensity, was perspective. "To share one body, we had to share one truth, had to see what really happened that day at the schoolhouse, what really happened in Colorado." Isaiah's composure cracked further. "No, the woman in Colorado, she's real. She's Sarah." "Is she?" Thorn's right hand flared, and suddenly the mirrors showed another scene, Isaiah meeting a young woman who bore a passing resemblance to Sarah Thorn, showing his men coaching her, creating a story, building a deception to hide their guilt. "You found someone who looked enough like her," Thorn's voices accused. Federa's story made her believe she was Sarah. Easier than facing what you'd done. But spirits deal in truth, Isaiah. They showed us everything. The supernatural phenomena reached a new intensity. The silver dollars spun faster, their flames burning higher. The mirror's reflections began overlapping, past and present, merging like watercolors in rain. 2 souls, Thorn declared, his dual nature more apparent than ever. 2 deaths, 2 paths to justice. The spirits allowed us to share one body, but now the price comes due. Marshal Cross, watching from the jail's porch, suddenly understood. "The balance," he whispered. "For 2 souls to share one flesh, Something of equal value had to be surrendered. The realization spread through the crowd like wildfire. They weren't just watching a confrontation between men. They were witnessing the completion of a supernatural contract, a bargain struck with powers older than the territory itself. Isaiah, perhaps sensing his fate approaching, made one last desperate play. "Kill me then," he snarled, spreading his arms. "Finish what you started in Colorado." "Death's too simple," Thorn replied, his left hand spinning the Colt while his right traced patterns of light. "The spirits demand balance. They showed us the truth. Now you have to live with it." The final act unfolded like a dream. The silver Colt spoke once from Thorn's left hand, the bullet splitting Isaiah's gun belt, marking him as surely as any brand. Simultaneously, his right hand released a pulse of spirit light that struck the savage brothers like lightning. They didn't fall, didn't die. Instead, they saw, really saw, everything they'd done. Every lie, every manipulation, every act of violence. The spirits forced the truth into their minds with the same clarity they'd shown Thorn. "That's your punishment," Thorn declared, as the savage brothers fell to their knees, overwhelmed by unfiltered truth. "To know what you did. To remember it every waking moment, every sleeping dream. To live with the kind of clarity only spirits can grant." Isaiah tried to speak, but only managed a choked sob as decades of carefully constructed deceptions crumbled. Under the weight of spirit-granted truth, the supernatural phenomena began to fade. The silver dollars slowed their spin, their flames dimming. The mirror's reflections settled back into ordinary light. But something was happening to Thorn, his dual nature becoming more pronounced, more visible. "The price," Rebecca Chen's grandmother intoned, "must be paid in full. Two cannot remain as one. The balance demands separation." Thorn's form seemed to shimmer, his left side moving with Ghost Hand's legendary grace, while his right pulsed with spirit-blessed power. The bargain that had allowed two souls to share one flesh was coming to an end. "Remember this day," his overlapping voices commanded as his form began to blur. "Remember that justice comes in many forms, and truth has many faces. But most of all, remember that every debt must be paid, every scale must be balanced." The sun emerged from behind a cloud, bathing Serpent Valley in golden light. The moment of final reckoning had arrived, and with it, the true price of spiritual justice was about to be revealed. The moment of final reckoning arrived with the force of a thunderclap. If this tale of supernatural justice has held you captive, make sure you're subscribed because the true price of vengeance is about to be revealed. As the golden light bathed Serpent Valley, Thorn's form began to change. The dual nature that had allowed him to exist as both Ghost Hand and the spirit-touched bounty hunter became more pronounced, more visible. His left side moved with the fluid grace of a legendary lawman, while his right pulsed with otherworldly power. "The balance demands completion," Rebecca Chen's grandmother announced, her voice still carrying the weight of ancient spirits. "Two cannot remain as one. The debt must be paid in full." The surviving silver dollars, still spinning but slower now, began to ring a mournful tone. The mirrors that had shown fragments of past and present started to crack, unable to contain the weight of multiple truths any longer. "You understand now, don't you?" Thorn's overlapping voices asked Isaiah, who remained on his knees, crushed by spirit-granted clarity. "Why did the woman in Colorado never really be Sarah? Why did your perfect deception crumble?" The mirrors offered one final reflection, the truth about Sarah Thorn. They saw her in the burning schoolhouse, not alone as Isaiah had claimed, but comforting her students until the very end. They saw her final moments, witnessed by both the lawman, who arrived too late, and the bounty hunter, who couldn't save her. "Two men," Thorn continued, his form becoming increasingly unstable. "Two failures, two oaths sworn in grief and rage. The spirits offered a bargain. Two souls could share one flesh long enough to bring true justice. But now the price comes. Due. Marshal Cross, watching with growing understanding, spoke softly to Hayes. Every bargain with the spirits demands balance. For two souls to share one body, something of equal value had to be promised in return. The supernatural phenomena that had marked Thorne's presence in Serpent Valley began to fade. The wind chimes fell silent, the mirrors stopped reflecting impossible moments, and the silver dollars finally ceased their spinning. But as these manifestations of spirit power faded, something else emerged, a visible separation in Thorne's very being. The price, he announced, his voice now clearly split between two distinct tones, wasn't death, wasn't even violence. The price was truth, pure, unfiltered, spirit-granted truth, the kind that strips away all lies, all self-deception. The Savage brothers, still reeling from their supernatural punishment, watched in horror as Thorne's form began to blur and... Separate. On the left stood the ghost of a lawman, badge glinting in the sunlight, moving with impossible speed. On the right, a bounty hunter marked by spirit power, his glowing hand painting sigils in the air. Your punishment, Isaiah, the lawman's voice declared, is to live with the truth. Every lie you've told, every deception you've crafted, the spirits have burned them away. You'll spend the rest of your days remembering exactly what you did, what you caused, what you tried to hide. And you'll share that clarity with everyone you meet, the bounty hunter added, his glowing hand pulsing. The spirit's mark is on. You now, anyone who looks in your eyes will see the truth about Sarah, about Colorado, about everything. Dr. Morrison, watching from his office, suddenly understood the full scope of what he was witnessing. It's not just punishment, he told Emma Sullivan. It's restoration. The spirits are setting right what was wrong, but the price became clear as Thorne's form finally separated completely. The bargain that had allowed two souls to share one body, to pursue justice through both human law and spirit power, was ending. The scales had to be balanced. Remember this, the lawman's ghost commanded, his form becoming increasingly transparent. Justice finds its mark, whether through lead or light, through law or spirit. The truth cannot stay buried forever. And remember, the bounty hunter added, his glowing hand beginning to fade, that every debt must be paid, every scale balanced. The spirits allow no exceptions, not even for those who serve their cause. The gathered crowd watched in awe as the two aspects of Thorne began to fade like morning mist. The lawman's speed, the bounty hunter's spirit touch, the combined force that had brought the Savage brothers to justice, all of it dissipating as the supernatural bargain reached its conclusion. Two souls, Rebecca Chen's grandmother intoned, joined to right a wrong. Now they must part, their purpose fulfilled, their debt to the spirits paid in full. Isaiah Savage, marked forever by spirit-granted truth, could only watch as the dual being that had destroyed his empire faded from sight. The woman he'd set up in Colorado, the lies he'd crafted about Sarah, the deceptions he'd built his life upon, all of it exposed and stripped away, leaving him with nothing but unfiltered clarity. The spirits, the bounty hunter's fading voice, explained, don't deal in simple vengeance. They deal in balance, in restoration. Your empire was built on lies, so they demanded truth as payment. Your power came from hidden sins, so they brought everything to light. And now, the lawman's ghost concluded, Serpent Valley can grow straight and true, without the poison of your deceptions. The price has been paid, not just by us, but by all who sought to bury truth beneath lies. The sun reached its zenith, and in that moment of perfect light, both aspects of Thorne vanished completely. The spirit's bargain was fulfilled, the scales balanced, the price paid in full. Two souls had shared one flesh long enough to bring true justice, and now they returned to their separate paths, their shared purpose accomplished. The silver dollars that had marked Thorne's property lay silent now, their supernatural purpose served. The mirrors that had reflected multiple truths showed only ordinary light. The wind chimes that had sung spirit songs fell quiet, their message delivered. In the days following the supernatural showdown, Serpent Valley underwent a transformation, as profound as the one they'd witnessed in their mysterious defender. If this tale of justice and spirits has touched your soul, make sure to subscribe, because some legends never truly fade. The Savage brothers faced justice in two forms. Earthly law saw them transferred to the territorial prison, their empire dismantled, their reign of terror ended. But the spiritual punishment proved far more severe. Marked by the spirit's truth, they could neither lie nor hide from their deeds. Every person they met could see the truth in their eyes, could feel the weight of their sins. Isaiah Savage, once the architect of elaborate deceptions, found himself compelled to speak only truth. The woman in Colorado, the one he'd set up to pose as Sarah, came forward with her own confession. She'd been a desperate widow, paid to play a role, to help craft a deception that could ease Isaiah's guilty conscience. The spirit's justice, Marshall Cross observed, watching Isaiah's transfer to the prison wagon, cuts deeper than any court sentence. They'll live with clear minds and clearer memories, unable to hide even from themselves. The Mackenzie Ranch stood empty now, its mysterious owner gone like morning mist. But the changes Thorne had brought to the valley remained. The silver dollars still lay where they'd fallen, ordinary coins now, but marked with strange patterns that caught the light in impossible ways. The mirrors he'd positioned remained, though they reflected only natural light. The wind chimes hung, silent, but would sometimes ring on perfectly still days, as if catching echoes of spirit songs. Dr. Morrison, examining these remnants with scientific curiosity, made detailed notes in his journal. The physical signs of supernatural presence fade, but the impact lingers. Like a lightning strike leaves its mark on sand, turning it to glass, the spirit's justice has permanently altered this valley's nature. Rebecca Chen's grandmother gradually emerged from her trance, but the experience had changed her. She spoke of seeing two paths now where before she'd seen one, of understanding how spirits and men could walk the same road toward justice. The oracle bones she'd consulted during the confrontation had changed too, each one now marked with dual symbols, law and spirit, vengeance and redemption. Emma Sullivan, cataloguing Thorne's final purchases from her store, found receipts signed in two distinct hands, one flowing and fast, one precise and measured. Two souls, she mused, showing them to Hayes. Even in the smallest things, they maintained their separate natures while sharing one purpose. The town itself flourished in the aftermath. Without the Savage brothers' shadow looming over them, people found their courage. The railroad, sensing the change in the valley's fortunes, finally laid track through the territory. New settlers arrived, drawn by stories of the place where spirits and justice had worked hand in hand. But it was old Jake Martinez who perhaps understood best what they'd witnessed. You see, he told anyone who'd listened from his favorite chair outside the saloon, most folks think justice is simple, right and wrong, law and crime. But what happened here, that was different. That was two kinds of justice working together. Two paths joining to set things right. The silver colt was never found, though some claimed to hear phantom gunshots at dawn, accompanied by flashes of spirit light. The glowing hands mark appeared occasionally on fence posts or barn doors, always in pairs, one mark swift and sure, the other touched by otherworldly power. Years later, when asked about the legend of Ghost Hand Thorne and the spirit touched, bounty hunter Marshall Cross would simply smile and say, "Some men choose to make their mark with speed, others with supernatural power. But the truly remarkable ones, they find a way to do both, even if the price is higher than most could bear." Sheriff A. Hayes kept the pine coffin Isaiah had brought, but not as a grim reminder. Instead, he turned it into a planter that sat outside the jail, growing healing herbs that Rebecca Chen's grandmother had planted. Seemed fitting, he explained. Something meant for death now supporting life, the kind of balance the spirits appreciate. The tale spread throughout the territories, changing with each telling. Some focused on the gunfighting, others on the supernatural elements. But those who had been there, who had witnessed the final separation of two souls sharing one flesh, knew the deeper truth. It wasn't just about vengeance, Rebecca Chen would tell her children and grandchildren. It was about balance, about how justice sometimes requires both human law and spirit wisdom, about how truth, real truth, demands a price few are willing to pay. They say on quiet nights, when the moon is full and the wind whispers through Serpent Valley, you can still hear two sets of footsteps walking the streets. One, quick and sure, moving with a lawman's purpose, the other slower, marked by the spirit's power. Different paths, different methods, but moving toward the same goal, justice in all its forms. The Mackenzie Ranch was eventually resettled, though no one ever stayed long. They all reported the same experiences, wind chimes ringing on still nights, mirrors catching impossible reflections, silver dollars appearing heads up on the morning grass. As if the land itself remembered its former tenant and the remarkable bargain that had allowed two souls to share one flesh in pursuit of true justice. Serpent Valley prospered under its unique legacy. It became known as a place where truth held special power, where justice wore many faces, and where the boundary between natural and supernatural remained just thin enough to remind folks that some debts can only be paid in spirit coin, and if you visit today, the old-timers might tell you to watch carefully at sunset. Sometimes, they say, you can still see two shadows moving as one, still hear two voices speaking truth in perfect harmony. A reminder that justice finds its mark whether through lead or light, through law or spirit, through the hands of one man or two souls sharing one purpose. Because in the end, every debt must be paid, every scale balanced, every truth revealed. That's the law of both men and spirits, and not even legends can escape it. The story of Serpent Valley became more than just a tale of supernatural vengeance. It became a testament to the price of truth and the nature of real justice. The territorial governor, upon hearing the full account from Marshall Cross, declared the valley a special jurisdiction, acknowledging that some places hold power beyond human law. Peter Savage, the youngest of the brothers, perhaps changed the most. After serving his sentence, he returned to Serpent Valley, not as a predator, but as a seeker. Under Rebecca Chen's grandmother's guidance, he began studying the old ways, learning to read the signs that Thorn had followed. He became something of a bridge between worlds, helping others understand that justice sometimes wears strange faces. The silver dollars that had marked Thorn's property were collected by the townspeople and forged into a memorial that stood in the town square. On its surface, two figures walked an eternal patrol, one casting a lawman's shadow, one trailing spirit light. Beneath it, in both English and Apache script, were written the words, "Two paths, one justice, truth eternal." They say that some legends never die, they just change form. In Serpent Valley, that proved truer than anyone could have imagined. The place where two men brought two kinds of justice became a sanctuary for those seeking truth, a warning to those hiding from it, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest powers come not from what we gain, but from what we're willing to surrender in service of something greater than ourselves. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.